That dark corner of your garden is not the enemy. Your plant selection is the enemy. Every single spring, countless backyard gardeners across America completely ignore their most potentially productive growing areas and instead pour their hard-earned money into sun-dependent plants that completely collapse before summer even hits its peak. What I am going to walk you through today are 13 specific crops that do not merely survive in lower light conditions, they actually produce more abundantly, develop sweeter flavors, and maintain productivity far longer precisely because of those shaded conditions. One of these crops is almost certainly the exact plant you abandoned several seasons ago because it kept going to seed on you before you could harvest anything worthwhile. Stay right here with me because before this video wraps up, that problem area of your yard is going to transform into the most valuable and productive growing space on your entire property. If you have ever walked through your garden during a hot July afternoon wondering why every single plant looks completely exhausted and sun-scorched, this video was made specifically for you. And if you are the type of gardener who values genuine, practical information that actually performs in a real American backyard rather than some commercial operation or a research facility with perfect controlled conditions, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now because that is the entire purpose of this channel. Every week, I publish content that major gardening corporations and your local garden center absolutely do not want you to have access to. Subscribe and let us completely transform your approach to gardening together. Crop 1, lettuce. Crop number 1 is lettuce. The overwhelming majority of gardeners make the same critical mistake with lettuce every single April and then turn around and blame the weather for their failure. Here is the actual truth of what is happening beneath the surface. Lettuce is fundamentally a cool season crop. When it gets exposed to intense heat combined with direct afternoon sun, it bolts. It sends up a flowering stalk, becomes unbearably bitter almost instantaneously, and turns completely unusable within just a few days. You personally did not make any mistakes. The location you chose was the mistake. In growing zones 6 and higher, lettuce that goes into a full sun bed during late April is essentially already losing the battle before May even shows up on the calendar. But take that exact same lettuce variety and relocate it to a spot receiving morning sun with afternoon shade protection, perhaps the north side of a raised bed, along an east-facing fence line, or positioned beneath the canopy of a taller companion crop, and the results are dramatically different. Soil temperatures remain significantly cooler. The plant holds steady in its productive leafing phase, and rather than a window of just 2 weeks for harvesting, you gain an additional 4 to 6 weeks of continuous cut-and-come-again production. The flavor improvement is not subtle or marginal either. Lettuce grown in shaded conditions is noticeably sweeter and far more tender because the plant is not generating the bitter defensive compounds that intense heat and full sun exposure force it to produce. This is not some clever gardening workaround. This is simply understanding plant biology and cooperating with it rather than fighting against it. You never had a lettuce problem. You had a placement problem all along, and that is genuinely one of the simplest problems in all of gardening to correct starting today. Crop 2, spinach. Crop number 2 is spinach. When soil temperatures begin climbing and light intensity increases through late spring, spinach reads that particular combination of conditions as a direct survival threat. Its biological response is immediate and decisive. It abandons vegetative growth completely and shifts into reproductive mode, bolting straight towards seed production. That response is not crop failure on your part. That is a plant executing precisely the survival programming built into it over thousands of years. But here is what fundamentally changes the equation for you as a gardener. Partial shade keeps soil temperatures within the range that spinach genuinely prefers for growth. The plant remains in its productive leafing stage rather than rushing toward reproduction, and instead of collapsing and becoming unusable after just 2 weeks, it delivers consistent harvests for 8 to 10 full weeks. In zones 7 and above, spinach planted into a full sunbed during April is essentially a waste of valuable seed by the time May heat arrives in force. Shade is not some backup strategy or consolation plan for spinach cultivation. In the majority of American growing zones, shade is the only approach that actually delivers consistent results season after season, and the flavor development in protected conditions is measurably superior. Shade-grown spinach is genuinely sweeter because it is not manufacturing stress compounds to cope with excessive heat exposure. Relocate your spinach to a shaded position, and it becomes one of the most dependable and rewarding crops growing anywhere in your yard. Crop 3 Arugula. Crop number 3 is Arugula. The primary reason most American gardeners believe they dislike Arugula comes down to a lighting problem rather than an actual taste preference. If you have ever cultivated Arugula in full sun conditions and found it aggressively and unpleasantly bitter, that harsh result had nothing to do with the variety you selected or the quality of your soil. That was a plant under significant stress doing exactly what stressed plants do, manufacturing defensive chemical compounds that make the leaves harsh, sharp, and genuinely unpalatable. Arugula grown in full sun in zones 6 and above bolts in approximately 3 weeks. The leaves take on a jagged, tough texture. The flavor intensifies into something almost overwhelming, and most gardeners at that point pull the whole planting out, decide Arugula is simply not for them, and never attempt it again. But Arugula cultivated in shaded conditions is an entirely different vegetable with an entirely different flavor profile. It becomes nutty, mildly and pleasantly peppery, with a complexity that makes it genuinely addictive in fresh salads. The leaves maintain their broad, tender texture, and the productive harvest window extends from 3 frustrating weeks all the way out to 2 and sometimes 3 full months. The practical advantage this creates for your spring garden is substantial. Establish Arugula in a shaded bed and succession plant a fresh row every 2 weeks. You will maintain continuous salad production from late April straight through early summer without experiencing a single bolt. In zones 7 through 9, this approach is not really optional if you want results. Arugula positioned in full afternoon sun during late April is already racing hard against the clock before it even establishes properly. Give it afternoon shade protection, and you completely redirect the outcome in your favor. Shade-grown Arugula represents what this crop is genuinely supposed to taste like. Once you experience it cultivated under the right conditions, you will understand immediately and completely why you never want to go back to the old approach. Right at this point, I want to pause and ask you something directly and honestly. How many crops on this list have you already attempted in full sun conditions and then written off permanently as failures? Take a moment to really consider how many growing seasons you have spent blaming your own abilities, criticizing your soil quality, faulting your local climate, or questioning your supposed lack of natural gardening instinct, when the real and fixable problem the entire time was simply where you were planting things. That is not your fault. That is the predictable outcome when advice developed for large-scale commercial agriculture gets handed to backyard home gardeners, as though the two situations are remotely equivalent. They never were. If this video is already beginning to shift how you perceive and evaluate the growing spaces in your yard, do something worthwhile right now and hit that subscribe button. Not as a casual courtesy, but because every single week on this channel I publish the kind of practical, biology-based information that solves exactly these types of persistent problems. Real, actionable solutions designed for real American backyard gardeners. You deserve a garden that genuinely performs and delivers results. This channel is going to help you build that garden one informed decision at a time. Crop 4 Kale. Crop number 4 is kale. You either genuinely enjoy kale or you grew it in full sun at some point. That observation is not meant as a joke. The bitterness and tough fibrous texture that causes so many people to swear off kale permanently is not an inherent characteristic of the plant itself. It is a documented stress response triggered by environmental conditions. Kale that receives intense heat exposure and direct afternoon sun produces glucosinolates, which are defensive chemical compounds that make the leaves bitter, fibrous, and genuinely unpleasant to consume in any preparation. In zones 6 through 9, kale planted in a full sun growing bed during April will be producing tough, bitter, unappetizing leaves by June, and the vast majority of gardeners will have stopped harvesting it and written off the entire crop by July. But relocate that identical kale variety to a bed receiving morning sun with afternoon shade protection, and something genuinely remarkable happens. The leaves become tender with an almost buttery texture. The bitterness that causes widespread kale aversion virtually disappears because the plant is not operating under heat stress and is therefore not producing those defensive compounds at the same elevated rate. There is a nutritional dimension to this that most people growing kale have never heard about. Kale actually increases its chlorophyll production under reduced light conditions, which means shade-grown kale is measurably more nutritionally concentrated, not less. The plant responds to lower available light by developing larger leaf surface area to capture whatever light is accessible. And those larger leaves are precisely what you want whether you are cooking, juicing, or eating fresh. In zones 5 through 9, kale planted on the east-facing side of a fence or raised bed wall receives ideal morning light combined with afternoon protection and will continue producing well into autumn and frequently right through the first frost event. Shade-grown kale is the variety of this crop that genuinely converts people who claim they hate kale. If someone in your household or social circle refuses to touch kale, I am genuinely confident it is because they have never once tasted it grown under the right conditions. Crop 5. Swiss Chard. Crop number 5 is Swiss Chard. This is the most consistently underutilized shade crop in the American backyard garden, and it will deliver season-long production with remarkably little effort or attention from you throughout. Most gardeners treat chard as an afterthought, something they drop into whatever bed space happens to be left over after everything else is planted. That approach is a significant missed opportunity because when chard is positioned correctly in partial shade, it becomes one of the most reliable, generous, and low-maintenance producers you can possibly grow from April straight through your first hard frost. Here's the specific advantage that genuinely changes the calculus for many gardeners, particularly those who struggle with keeping up with watering demands during the heat of summer. Chard growing in partial shade requires nearly half the water that identical plants demand when grown in full sun exposure. The large, broad leaves transpire significantly less moisture when they are not being continuously hammered by intense afternoon sun, and the soil beneath them stays measurably cooler and more consistently moist. That translates directly into less work and maintenance for you personally, and a stronger, more vigorous, more consistent plant throughout the growing season. The visual appeal of this crop in shaded conditions is also genuinely impressive. Those brilliant rainbow stems in vivid reds, bright yellows, and deep oranges actually develop more intense and saturated color in partial shade because the pigmentation is not being continuously bleached out by constant direct sun exposure. Establish chard along the east side of a fence line, along a north-facing bed edge, or positioned in the shadow cast by a taller companion crop, and you will be harvesting from it continuously for months on end. In zones 5 through 9, this represents one of the strongest and most reliable April plantings you can possibly make in any partially shaded space you have available. Low effort, high reward, all season long. I want to pause here and ask you something honestly, and I genuinely want your honest answer in the comments section below. How many of you currently have a shaded area somewhere in your yard that has been sitting completely empty or consistently underperforming for years because you simply assumed nothing worthwhile could possibly grow there? Tell me specifically about that spot. Describe it for me. North-facing raised bed, area beneath an established tree, strip alongside a garage wall. I want you to recognize by the time this video concludes that every single one of those spaces is about to become genuinely productive growing ground. Share your specific situation in the comments. Let us figure it out together. Crop 6, Bok Choy. Crop number 6 is Bok Choy. If you have ever attempted to grow Bok Choy, Mizuna, or Tatsoi in full sun conditions during an American April and watch them bolt and become unusable within just 2 weeks of planting, you are far from alone in that experience. And you did not fail at anything. These particular crops simply cannot deliver acceptable performance in full sun once ambient temperatures start trending upward. And in most regions of the country, April temperatures are already moving in that direction with increasing momentum. In zones 6 through 9, Asian greens positioned in full afternoon sun during late spring are fighting a losing battle from the very moment they go into the ground. The flavor profile that develops under full sun stress conditions becomes sharp, aggressively bitter, and texturally tough in ways that make them unappealing for both raw and cooked applications. But in partial shade, these exact same crops undergo a complete transformation in quality and productivity. The flavor becomes mild and carries a pleasant natural sweetness. The texture remains tender enough for raw salad applications and wilts beautifully when exposed to heat in a pan. And the productive harvest window stretches from 2 frustrating weeks of poor quality production out to 2 genuinely productive months of consistent harvesting. Bok Choy, positioned in the dappled shade of a taller companion crop or along a shaded bed edge, represents one of the fastest and most rewarding spring plantings you can make across most American growing zones. Mizuna and Tatsoi deliver equally impressive productivity under the same partially shaded conditions, and both function as cut-and-come-again crops, meaning a single planting provides you with multiple successive harvests throughout the growing season. If you have never successfully grown Asian greens to a satisfying harvest, the reason is almost certainly that you have never grown them in the right location. Shade is not a workaround or compromise for these crops. It is the only growing environment in which they genuinely reach their full productive and flavor potential. If you are still watching at this point in the video and you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I want to ask you something genuine and straightforward. How many more spring gardening seasons do you want to spend putting plants in the wrong locations, watching them underperform or fail completely, and walking away from your garden feeling frustrated and defeated? Everything you are absorbing right now, the placement principles, the plant biology explaining why these crops behave the way they do, the zone-specific practical guidance, this is exactly the kind of foundational information that permanently changes how you approach gardening. Not just this coming April, but every single April going forward for as long as you garden. Subscribe right now. Share this video with any gardener in your life who has been struggling with shaded growing areas in their yard. You might genuinely rescue their entire growing season with that one simple action. Crop 7, cilantro. Crop number 7 is cilantro. This is the one. This is the crop that has generated more frustration among American home gardeners than nearly anything else on this entire list. I want you to pay particularly close attention to what follows because this information is going to permanently and fundamentally change your relationship with this plant. The overwhelming majority of people plant cilantro in full sun, watch it bolt within 2 weeks of establishment, conclude that they are incapable of growing it successfully, and never attempt it again. That exact story is so universally common that it has become a running joke in gardening communities and online forums across the country. But here is the critical piece of information that nobody bothered to share with you. Cilantro bolting has almost nothing whatsoever to do with your gardening ability and almost everything to do with your light exposure choices. Cilantro is biologically programmed at a fundamental level to bolt the instant it detects a specific combination of heat and intense light exposure. That is not a design flaw in the plant. That is a survival mechanism hardwired into its genetics over thousands of years of evolution. And in the majority of American growing zones, full sun exposure during late April provides precisely the environmental conditions that trigger that bolt mechanism almost immediately after planting. Here is what changes when you move cilantro into partial shade protection. The productive growing window extends from 2 weeks out to 2 and sometimes 3 full months of consistent harvest. The leaves develop larger size and more concentrated, complex flavor. And that soapy, harsh quality that causes some people to say they genuinely cannot tolerate cilantro, that characteristic is partially a stress response to excessive heat and light intensity, and it diminishes significantly in plants grown under shaded conditions. In zones 5 through 9, cilantro positioned in full sun during late April is already running critically short on productive time before you even finish the planting process. Tuck it into the shade created by a taller companion crop. Plant it along a north-facing wall or fence line. Position it beneath your tomato or pepper plants where it receives filtered light and benefits from cooler soil temperatures maintained by the surrounding foliage. In zones 5 and 6, where spring temperatures stay cooler for a longer period, you have somewhat more flexibility in timing, but afternoon shade protection will still dramatically extend your harvest window and meaningfully improve the flavor of what you harvest. Cilantro is not a difficult crop. It has never been a difficult crop by nature. It has been a consistently misplaced crop. And now that you understand where it actually wants and needs to grow, you will never again lose a cilantro planting to premature bolting. How many of you watching right now have given up on cilantro entirely because it kept bolting on you regardless of what you tried? Drop a number in the comments. Just tell me how many times that particular failure has happened in your garden, because I have a strong feeling the response to that specific question is going to generate one of the most active and engaged comment sections this channel has ever produced. And if you know anyone, a neighbor, a family member, someone in a gardening group you participate in, who has complained repeatedly about cilantro bolting on them season after season, share this video with them immediately. This is the specific answer they have been searching for through every single frustrating growing season. Crop 8, parsley. Crop number 8 is parsley. The finest, most flavorful parsley you have ever tasted in your life came from a garden with shade protection, and you almost certainly did not know that at the time you tasted it. Parsley is one of those crops that most American gardeners grow on complete autopilot. They put it into whatever space happens to be convenient, typically full sun because that is what the nursery tag instructs, and they accept whatever results they get. Woody stems, diminished aromatic intensity, a plant that looks increasingly ragged and spent as summer temperatures climb. That disappointing result is not what parsley is designed to produce. Under its preferred growing conditions, parsley generates leaves that are broad, genuinely tender, deeply and richly aromatic, and flavorful in ways that meaningfully elevate cooking. And those preferred conditions include partial shade, cooler and more consistent soil temperatures, and protection from intense afternoon sun exposure. In full sun, parsley diverts significant metabolic energy into stress management responses. It develops tougher cell walls, woodier and less pleasant stem texture, and produces substantially less of the essential oils responsible for its characteristic flavor and aroma. Relocate it to partial shade and the plant redirects all of that energy into precisely what you actually want from it. Robust leaf production, concentrated aroma, and rich flavor development. There is a practical long-term benefit here that matters particularly to gardeners in zones 5 through 7. Parsley is a biennial plant, meaning it completes its natural life cycle across 2 growing seasons rather than 1. When you establish it in a protected, partially shaded location, it has a dramatically improved probability of successfully overwintering and returning the following spring with a strong, deep, established root system ready to go. That means a single planting can potentially deliver 2 complete seasons of productive harvest. The north side of a raised bed wall, an east-facing structure, or a position tucked alongside taller herbs where it captures morning light with afternoon protection, these are your ideal placement targets. Parsley growing in partial shade also experiences dramatically reduced pest pressure because a plant that is not weakened and compromised by heat stress maintains stronger and more effective natural chemical defenses against insects and disease. Less intervention required from you, more consistent production, and significantly better flavor. Parsley in shade is not a compromise or a fallback option. It is simply parsley grown precisely the way it was always meant to be cultivated. Crop 9 chives. Crop number 9 is chives. Most American gardeners grow chives and simply accept whatever they happen to get from them because chives are famously tolerant, persistent, and genuinely difficult to kill through neglect, and that reputation is entirely accurate. But there exists a meaningful and noticeable difference between chives that merely survive through a growing season and chives that genuinely and fully thrive, and that difference is almost entirely determined by light exposure conditions. Chives in full sun develop a sharp, almost aggressive pungency that easily overwhelms whatever dish you add them to. The leaf texture becomes tough and less pleasant, and the plant expends considerable metabolic energy managing heat stress that could otherwise be directed entirely into producing the tender, flavorful, delicate growth you actually want to harvest and use. In partial shade, that dynamic changes completely and noticeably. The flavor mellows into something genuinely delicate and subtly sweet, a pleasant onion complexity that enhances and complements dishes rather than dominating them. The leaves maintain their tender, appealing texture much further into the growing season, and the plant grows with more vigor and consistency because it is not continuously managing the metabolic burden of heat stress. Here is something genuinely important about shade-grown chives that the majority of gardeners have never encountered. The concentration of beneficial sulfur compounds, the specific compounds responsible for both the characteristic allium flavor and the extensively documented health benefits of allium family plants, is measurably higher in chives cultivated under filtered light conditions compared to those grown in full sun. That is not anecdotal gardening wisdom or folk knowledge, that is documented plant chemistry. Shade-grown chives are therefore not only more pleasant and nuanced to eat, but measurably more nutritionally valuable as well. Chives are perennial plants in zones 3 through 9, returning reliably and enthusiastically every single April without any replanting effort from you. Establish them once in the right partially shaded position, and you will be harvesting from them for years with virtually zero maintenance requirements. They divide naturally and freely, and will gradually spread to fill a shaded bed edge in a way that is both visually attractive and continuously productive. This represents one of the absolute lowest effort, highest long-term return investments you can make this April in any partially shaded space anywhere on your property. If you are still watching at this point and have not yet subscribed to this channel, I want you to genuinely consider something for a moment. You now understand clearly why cilantro keeps bolting on you season after season. You know precisely why your kale develops bitterness and toughness every summer. You understand the mechanism behind why your lettuce fails and becomes unusable every July. How long have you been gardening actively without access to this level of practical biology-grounded information? How many growing seasons have you spent frustrated, spending money on plants that consistently underperformed and silently convinced that your yard or your abilities were fundamentally the problem? This channel exists specifically to close that knowledge gap permanently. Real, actionable, biology-based information producing real, measurable results. If that is what you have been looking for, and the fact that you are still here watching tells me clearly that it is, subscribe right now and drop a comment below telling me which crop on this list you are most motivated to try in a shaded spot this coming April. I want to know specifically. I read every single comment without exception. Crop 10, mint. Crop number 10 is mint. Every gardener with any experience knows that mint is extraordinarily tough. It spreads aggressively, it survives complete neglect, it returns reliably year after year regardless of how little attention you give it. Most people have come to treat that toughness as mint's primary and defining characteristic. But here's what almost nobody in the gardening world discusses openly. Mint grown in full sun is a pale, diminished, significantly inferior version of what mint actually is, and what it is capable of producing, the essential oils responsible for mint's characteristic and distinctive aroma and flavor. The specific compounds that make it genuinely worth growing and using are produced at substantially higher concentrations when the plant is cultivated in partial shade with cooler, more consistent soil temperatures. Full sun mint survives reliably. Shade-grown mint thrives completely, and that qualitative difference is immediately apparent and unmistakable the moment you bruise a leaf between your fingers and bring it to your nose. Mint evolved naturally along stream banks and at the edges of woodland areas, environments characterized by consistent available moisture and filtered indirect light rather than intense direct sun exposure. When you plant it in full sun conditions, you are asking it to perform outside its genuinely preferred environmental parameters, and it will do exactly that because mint is nothing if not persistent and adaptable, but you are leaving significant quality and flavor concentration on the table by doing so. In partial shade, mint develops leaves that are noticeably darker, more intensely aromatic, and richer in the volatile oils that make it valuable for culinary applications, for brewing teas, or for any other use you have planned for it. There is a practical maintenance advantage here that matters particularly for gardeners who want productive, genuinely low-maintenance plantings that do not require constant attention. Mint positioned in a shaded corner or along a shaded bed edge provides useful and attractive ground coverage with virtually no intervention required from you throughout the season. It fills growing space that would otherwise remain empty and unproductive, actively suppresses competing weed growth, and delivers harvestable growth continuously all season long. If you grow it in a container, which is always a sensible approach with mint given its vigorous spreading habit, a shaded porch or patio location will give you the most flavorful and aromatically rich mint you have ever grown, with almost no effort required to maintain it. Mint is perennial in zones 3 through 8 and returns with enthusiasm every April without replanting. Establish it once in the right partially shaded location, and it will become one of the most consistently productive and rewarding corners of your entire garden for years stretching well into the future. Shade-grown mint is what mint is genuinely supposed to taste and smell like. Once you grow it this way with intention and proper placement, you will never voluntarily return it to full sun conditions again. Crop 11 peas. Crop number 11 is peas. Your grandparents and their parents before them understood something fundamental about cultivating peas successfully that the majority of modern American gardeners have completely forgotten or never had the opportunity to learn. And if you have ever grown peas in full sun conditions and watched them shrivel, stop producing entirely, and become tough and starchy the moment late spring temperatures began climbing, this section is going to make everything finally click into clear understanding. Peas are a cool season crop with extraordinary sensitivity to heat and elevated light intensity. In zones 6 through 9, peas that go into a full sun growing bed during late April are already operating on borrowed time before May even arrives on the calendar. The moment soil temperatures begin rising and afternoon sun intensifies in angle and duration, pea plants respond by shutting down reproductive production completely. The pods that have already formed turn tough and starchy almost overnight. The season effectively concludes. And most gardeners accept this premature ending as simply the natural and inevitable way peas behave. It is not. It is specifically how peas behave when planted in the wrong location. Here is what afternoon shade protection accomplishes for peas that the vast majority of gardeners have simply never had the opportunity to discover through direct experience. Protecting your pea plants from direct afternoon sun exposure keeps soil temperatures within the preferred productive range for peas for weeks longer than any full sunbed can possibly sustain. That temperature differential alone extends your genuinely productive harvest window by 3 to 4 weeks in most American growing zones. The pods that develop under those protected conditions stay tender and sweet significantly longer into the season. The flavor difference is real, immediate, and unmistakable. Shade-protected peas are noticeably and substantially sweeter because the plant is not diverting metabolic energy into managing heat stress. That energy goes directly and productively into pod development and natural sugar accumulation instead. In zones 6 through 9, this is not an optional enhancement strategy. It is the fundamental difference between a genuinely productive and satisfying pea season and a consistently disappointing one. Position your peas to receive morning sun with afternoon protection. The east-facing side of a fence line, a vertical trellis structure, a tall raised bed wall, or the shadow cast by a structure that blocks late-day sun all provide suitable protection. In zones 4 and 5, where spring temperatures naturally remain cooler for a longer period, you have more inherent flexibility in placement, but afternoon shade protection will still meaningfully extend your productive season and noticeably improve the flavor of your harvest. The most effective placement approach is training peas up a trellis positioned on the east side of your growing area. They receive exactly the light balance they require: morning sun for productive photosynthesis and afternoon protection from the heat that shuts down production. The peas your grandparents grew tasted better than what you typically harvest today because of where they intuitively placed them in their gardens, not simply because of the varieties they selected. That accumulated wisdom got lost somewhere in the transition from passed-down garden knowledge to commercially produced seed catalog recommendations and modern garden center plant tags that simply say, "full sun." Now you have that wisdom restored and ready to apply. Are you planning to grow peas this April? Tell me what growing zone you are in and whether you have ever experimented with giving them afternoon shade protection. I want to know specifically how many people watching right now have experienced that heartbreaking moment when their peas simply stopped producing seemingly overnight and they could not understand why. Share it in the comments below. Your specific experience and what you share about it might help another gardener watching this video figure out exactly what went wrong in their own garden and how to fix it going forward. Crop 12, broccoli. Crop number 12 is broccoli. If your broccoli has ever bolted prematurely and produced small, loose, bitter heads that were barely worth the effort of harvesting, shade was the solution the entire time and nobody bothered to tell you. This is one of the most common and genuinely frustrating disappointments in the American backyard garden, and it is almost entirely attributable to a placement problem rather than anything wrong with your timing, your soil, or your seed selection. Here is precisely what unfolds. You plant broccoli into a full sun bed in April. It establishes and grows strongly in the early weeks and you feel genuinely confident about the season ahead. Then temperatures climb through May and into June. Light intensity and duration increase. And before your heads have a reasonable opportunity to develop properly to full size and density, the plant bolts. The head you do manage to harvest is loose, small, and carries a bitterness that makes it far less enjoyable than what you anticipated. The side shoots that should continue generating harvest for weeks arrive briefly and then shut down abruptly. You attribute the failure to the variety you selected or to your timing choices, and you try a different approach the following season. The result is essentially identical. The real cause remains unaddressed. Broccoli is a cool season brassica that evolved in coastal Mediterranean environments characterized by frequent cloud cover, reliable moisture availability, and moderate, stable temperatures. Intense sun exposure and elevated heat trigger premature bolting in broccoli just as reliably and predictably as they do in lettuce and spinach. The plant interprets those particular environmental conditions as a signal that its reproductive window is closing rapidly, and it rushes to set seed rather than developing the large, dense, flavorful head you have been patiently waiting to harvest. Partial shade interrupts that triggering signal effectively. Cooler soil temperatures combined with filtered afternoon light maintain the plant in its productive heading stage for significantly longer than any full sunbed can provide. The heads that develop under those protected conditions are larger, denser, and carry a noticeably sweeter, nuttier flavor that full sun broccoli rarely achieves even under ideal circumstances. And the side shoots, those smaller secondary heads that form after you harvest the main central head, continue producing for weeks and sometimes months, rather than appearing briefly and shutting down almost immediately. In zones 6 through 9, broccoli planted in full afternoon sun during late April is already compromised before it has any reasonable chance to prove itself. The east-facing side of a tall, raised bed provides ideal growing conditions. A location that receives 4 to 5 hours of morning sun followed by afternoon shade protection is the genuine sweet spot for broccoli production in most American growing zones. Broccoli cultivated in partial shade also requires less supplemental water and experiences significantly reduced cabbage worm pressure, because a plant that is not weakened by heat stress maintains more effective natural chemical defenses. Less intervention and monitoring required from you, consistently better results season after season. Broccoli is not a finicky or difficult crop by nature. It is a consistently misunderstood one. and partial shade represents the single most impactful and immediately actionable change the majority of American gardeners can make to finally achieve the broccoli season they have been chasing unsuccessfully for years. If you are watching right now and you've attempted broccoli 2 or 3 or more times with the same disappointing results every time, try one specific thing differently this April. Change the location. Move it to a spot with afternoon shade protection. That single adjustment is going to change everything about your experience with this crop. And when it works, come back to this video and tell me about it in the comments. I genuinely want to hear that story from you. Crop 13 beets. Crop number 13 is beets. Most American gardeners who grow beets are growing them exclusively for the roots. Gardeners who understand shade cultivation grow beets and harvest 2 completely distinct and valuable crops from a single planting. And that dual harvest advantage is only the beginning of the compelling case for including beets in your shaded growing beds this April. Here is what the majority of gardeners experience when they grow beets in full sun, particularly in zone 6 and above during late spring and summer conditions. The roots develop visible growth rings. They become woody and tough with a texture that makes them genuinely unpleasant to eat, whether roasted, pickled, or consumed raw. The flavor profile shifts away from the deep, rich, natural sweetness that makes beets genuinely delicious and towards something flat, muted, and sometimes carrying an unpleasant bitterness. Gardeners who have exclusively experienced beets grown in full sun during warm conditions very frequently conclude that they simply do not enjoy beets as a vegetable, but what they actually do not enjoy is a heat-stressed beet. And those are 2 entirely different things separated by nothing more than placement. Partial shade fundamentally transforms the entire quality profile of a beet planting. Cooler soil temperatures slow the root development rate in a way that concentrates natural sugars rather than rushing fibrous structural development. The roots harvested from a shaded bed are tender, deeply and richly flavored, and completely free of the woody concentric rings that make full sun summer beets so consistently disappointing to eat. In zones 6 through 9, beets planted in full sun during late April will be experiencing heat-related quality deterioration by June. In partial shade, those same beets remain productive and maintain consistent harvest quality well into summer from the first root you pull to the last one of the season. The leafy green tops of your beet plants are measurably more nutritious than the roots by virtually every nutritional metric available, containing higher concentrations of iron, calcium, and essential vitamins than the roots themselves. And beet greens cultivated in partial shade are dramatically superior to anything you harvest from a full sun planting. In full sun, beet greens become tough, strongly and sometimes unpleasantly flavored, and genuinely difficult to work with in the kitchen past a certain point in the growing season. In partial shade, they maintain tenderness and mild, pleasant flavor all season long. They cook down beautifully in virtually any application. They work well raw in salads when harvested young, and they provide a continuous cut-and-come-again harvest that keeps producing as long as the roots remain in the ground beneath them. A single packet of beet seeds established in a shaded growing bed gives you 2 distinct vegetables, tender and naturally sweet roots combined with mild, deeply nutritious greens, for the entire growing season from one planting. That is one of the best returns on investment of any crop you can put into the ground this April anywhere in your garden. In zones 5 through 9, beets represent one of the most reliable and rewarding April plantings available for any partially shaded bed you have to work with. They germinate readily in cool soil conditions, establish quickly and without much fuss, and require minimal ongoing intervention once they are properly in the ground. Thin them to 3 to 4 inches of spacing. Maintain consistent soil moisture for the first 2 weeks of establishment, and then allow the shade conditions to do the heavy lifting for you throughout the season. A bed receiving morning sun with afternoon shade protection is your ideal target. The north-facing side of a raised bed, along an east-facing fence line, or in the dappled, filtered shade beneath an established fruit tree, all work exceptionally well for beet production. Closing. Right here, before we bring this video to a close, I want you to do something genuinely important. Look at your entire property right now with completely fresh eyes and a completely new framework for evaluation. That strip of ground running along your north-facing wall, that corner tucked beneath the old established tree, the east side of your fence that never receives afternoon sun, the bed running alongside your garage structure, every single one of those spaces that you have been walking past and writing off as useless or unproductive for years is actually a specialized and valuable growing zone that has been patiently waiting for the right crops to be planted there, and now you know precisely and specifically what those crops are. 13 of them, all proven in real garden conditions, all genuinely productive, and all ready to go into the ground this April. If this video genuinely shifted how you see even one growing space in your yard, and I believe with confidence that it shifted how you see several of them, then I need you to do 3 specific things right now. Hit the like button because it tells me directly that this type of practical biology-grounded content is worth continuing to produce and publish. Subscribe if you have not done so already, because every single week this channel publishes information that solves real, persistent problems in real American backyard gardens. And share this video with one gardener you know personally who has been struggling with shaded areas in their yard and treating them as wasted space. You are not simply sharing a video link, you are handing them a practical solution they have been needing and searching for through multiple frustrating growing seasons. And finally, the question I want every single person watching to answer in the comments right now. Which of these 13 crops surprised you the most when you heard about its relationship with shade? And which one are you going to plant in your shaded spot first this April? Tell me your growing zone, tell me your chosen crop, and tell me about that specific spot in your yard that is about to stop being a source of frustration and start being the most productive and rewarding growing space on your entire property. I read every comment, every single one without exception.